Americans still waiting for relief from record high inflation after the consumer price index hit a staggering 9.1 in June. Democratic Congresswoman from Pennsylvania and member of the House Foreign Affairs, Armed Services and Small Business Committees, Chrissy Houlahan, joining us now. Congresswoman, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on again.
Of course, good to always talk to you. So the White House has been celebrating this dip in gas prices over the course of the last month or so, which of course is welcome news, but with a lot of buts. When prices were going up, we heard so often that it was Putin's fault, the oil company's fault, and now when they come down, the president apparently does control gas prices. But more importantly, gas prices really aren't the only thing that need to come down. Inflation, as we mentioned, hit 9.1% last month. It's outpaced wage growth for 15 consecutive months. So how much credit does the White House really deserve?
So obviously inflation is real and it's a real thing and we need to be aggressive about it. You could argue, and I would argue, that the Fed was perhaps too slow in moving on this issue. And there is more to this, of course, than gas prices alone. And so I do think that there's quite a lot of work that still can be done. I'm part of a group that's called the New Dem Coalition, and I helped found a group, inflation working group, that just recently put out an inflation report that was lauded by Forbes report as being the best blueprint to combat inflation that's come out of Congress. And it does go over all of the things, energy being one of them, but only one of them, that we can be doing to push on all the levers possible to lower this inflation problem that we're having, whether it be supply chains, whether it be energy security, as I've talked about, workforce issues, lowering the price of agriculture. Those sorts of things that, to try to make the American dollar go farther, are the things that are in that report. And I would encourage people to take a look at that, because it is an example of what all can be done, not just to Congress, not just the administration, but all levers of government to try to address this really important issue.
I'd like to take a deeper look at that. You know, the White House says releasing barrels from the strategic reserves has kept gas prices at bay, but that is scheduled to end in October. And then in December, we've got this ban on cargo ships from Russian oil into Europe. That's going to go in place December 5th. It would block double the amount of oil from the market since the war began. And of course, there's this concern that Russia could shut down supply to Europe completely. So my point is that things might seem like they're trending better now, but it's pretty tenuous. And the White House does not appear to want to fill this Russia-sized hole in the market with product from the U.S. I want to play for you what the president said yesterday.
We're going to look at ways to increase oil production from the existing wells and permits that exist today. But the real answer is to get to a clean energy economy as soon as possible.
What's your reaction to that?
So my reaction would be, it's a yes and. Yes, we need to make sure that we are using all the resources that we have available to us here, and we need to be making sure that we're looking forward to the fact that we need to reduce our dependence as a nation and as a planet on those sorts of sources of energy. And so I think that we absolutely need to be doing both. I think that the United States, we need to, as a nation, as a government, be making sure that we're showing the demand signal to the industry, to the oil and gas industry, that they can have a reliable demand coming into them so they feel comfortable being able to level out the production that they already have. But we also need to be moving aggressively forward, as we have been in places like the American Rescue Plan and other places, to make sure that we're also thinking about the renewable opportunities that we must pursue as well.
So the White House is under a lot of pressure for the president to reach as far as he can on climate after Senator Manchin basically killed the climate provisions of the Reconciliation Initiative last week or the week before. But it's, you know, a tough time to be making executive orders on climate, given that it could be used as a legal basis to block oil and gas drilling or other projects. The president obviously didn't pull that trigger, but he says it's coming. What's your view on that?
So I'm not certain that I'm completely following what your question is. I think what you're asking is whether or not it makes sense to declare some sort of an emergency, climate emergency. I think that what I push back on both parts of the aisle on is that everything cannot be so hyperbolic and so extreme at all times. We really need to be working together collaboratively across both sides of the aisle to push forward on the things that we know are important. People agree that our planet is heating up at an alarming rate, and people agree that we need to do something about that. The vast majority of us do. And my frustration is this far left and far right swings all the time end up with us, frankly, never moving anywhere and never getting anything done. And we really need to knock it off, to be honest.
with just 30 seconds left, I guess to rephrase my question, we're in a time when the domestic oil producers have been pushing the White House to send a strong signal to the market that, they support long-term investment. But at the same time, the White House is under pressure to make these executive orders. And does that timing conflict? Is it the right time to be reaching far on climate when you've got domestic oil producers saying we need a strong signal that the White House will support us?
I think right now is the time for us all to be working collaboratively and collectively together, both as a Congress and as an administration and as industry as well, to address this issue right now, this issue of inflation right now. And that may mean that it's both a yes and combination. It's something that we're doing right now, but it's also things that can pull those levers in the future as well. Okay. Things like making sure that it sounds like that we might be out of time, but I'll stop there.
Well, we would appreciate having you back anytime you can. Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan, always enjoy speaking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.